I'm Joseph Sutkowi. I'm the Chief Waterfront Design Officer at Waterfront Alliance. I oversee the WEDG program, the Waterfront Edge Design Guidelines. We're going to talk today about the River Mile South Platte River Restoration Project's achievement as the first riverine wedge site and the first wedge site that is west of the Mississippi River. We're excited about this project's achievement. The way that we will run today's webinars, that I'm going to give you a quick overview of wedge for those on the webinar that aren't familiar with it. And the emphasis here is really going to be that this is a really challenging system to earn verification in. We do not review projects lightly. And when a project like this one earns wedge verification, that's our certification that a project is resilient, accessible, and ecological, that really is a significant achievement for that site. You can go to the next slide. So WEDG is based at Waterfront Alliance. Waterfront Alliance is a New York, New Jersey-based nonprofit that focuses on thriving and resilient waterfront, shorelines, and coastlines. Almost all of our work is focused on the New York, New Jersey harbor region, and the WEDG program, Waterfront Edge Design Guidelines, started that way. Or that was just focused on New York, New Jersey harbor. We since expanded in 2019 to all coastal communities, and then just at the end of 2023, created a version of WEDG that applied to freshwater systems as well. And this is only the second freshwater project that's completed review and certification under WEDG version 3.0 that includes freshwater. You can go to the next slide. So there are three main principles behind WEDG. We look at resilience, we look at ecology, and we look at access. And the overall principle behind WEDG is that regardless of what waterfront you're on, whether you're at Brooklyn Bridge Park, which is what you're seeing on the slide, whether you're on the South Platte River in downtown Denver, or whether you're on the small creek through downtown Greenville, Michigan, where I'm from, regardless of where you are, the waterfront is a really special place. It is where people want to go. It is where our most valuable real estate is. It is where we have really unique and challenged sensitive habitats. And it is our first line of defense for flooding and other climate change related hazards. So WEDG was created to help projects that are working on the waterfront, whether they're industrial, whether they're park, whether they're ecological restoration. WEDG was created to help projects get the design right. So we're only going to touch a waterfront every 50, 75, 100 years. We're building infrastructure and systems that are meant to last. It's really imperative that we get it right. And that's what WEDG is really aimed at making happen for projects. And the key to getting it right through the lens of WEDG is this balance of resilience, ecology, and access. And you'll see as we get into the presentation on this project on the South Platte River, that these three themes are really present and evident throughout the project. Next slide. So there are 15 WEDG verified projects across the country. This is number 15. There are another 18 that are currently in some stage of the review pipeline. As many of the folks on the webinar know, waterfront projects move very, very slowly. The sort of concept and master plan stage to actual implementation, construction, and site opening can be a years and years long process. There are 18 more WEDG projects that are somewhere in that stage that'll be coming to fruition. And what I want to draw folks' attention to on this slide is just the breadth of sites that have earned WEDG verification. You have park spaces and mixed-use developments like the River Mile project. You have port and industrial facilities like Oak Point McKinnis Cement here in New York, and Sims Recycling, which is a barging operation. You have large-scale resilience projects. You have small-scale neighborhood parks. And you also have residential developments. So WEDG is really intended to work across all types of projects and help them build in resilience, ecology, and access. And then for those projects that are doing that, really recognize them for the impacts that they're making, and through that, encourage other projects to do the same. Next slide, please. So WEDG at its heart is a rating system. You're going to be familiar with the LEED standards for buildings. Maybe you know Envision, which is an infrastructure rating system. We're structured similar to those, where you have a set of criteria, a set of points that projects can earn by adhering to those criteria. And then for projects that cross a particular threshold, you get this certification that essentially says, yes, this project was designed right. This is going to be a great thing for the community that it's in. And there's two distinctions that I'll make between WEDG and some of the other rating systems that are out there that I think you'll really see the connection to on this project. And the first is that, hey, there's an obvious waterfront connection. Other rating systems out there don't necessarily have the waterfront specific focus. Every credit in WEDG understands and works with the fact that you're building on the waterfront, and that's a very unique set of circumstances. There's a lot of constraints and complexities that brings in, but there's also a lot of opportunities, things that you can only do on the waterfront that we want to help maximize. And then there's also an element of the community benefits of these projects. So WEDG looks at not only what are you doing on the site itself, but what is the impact for the broader community? How are people going to use this site? What do residents think of this site? How do you reduce flooding beyond the property line? Those types of community benefits and that broader impact is something that is really a major focus of WEDG. So for projects like the River Mile, you have this guidance that's gearing projects to really look beyond just their own property and the value that it brings to the site owner. Next slide. So I'm going to walk through at a very high level what WEDG actually looks at. There are a total of 143 different performance metrics within the WEDG standard. So 143 different things that we are looking at. And we've got them kind of grouped in a set of 6 categories that are going to first look at site assessment and planning. So have you done the upfront due diligence work that you need to have a successful project? Have you brought in a multidisciplinary team? Have you done the vulnerability and ecological assessments? Did you have a plan, and did you execute a plan for equitable stakeholder engagement? And then have you done maintenance and adaptive management planning across the project? Go to the next slide. And all of these things are things that this project in Denver was assessed against. So category 1 is looking at climate and hazard resilience. We're going to look at how is a project avoiding or reducing flood risk from the water body. We're going to look at how you're reducing pluvial flooding and stormwater discharge. We're going to look at how you're improving discharge quality. We're looking at emergency preparedness and planning. And we're looking at how you're reducing contributions to urban heat. Next slide. And for all of these things, WEDG is built to be above and beyond what a typical regulatory standard is going to ask for and what a typical and building code is going to ask for. So these are all areas where we expect that a particular design team like Calibre Engineering and Wenk Associates, who you'll hear from in a moment, and the developers or the site owners, we're looking to them to go above and beyond what the minimum requirements are. And that's true of all of these credits. Community access and connection, category 2 is going to look at how are you providing public access space on the waterfront? How are you thinking about things like sensory connections and visual connections to the waterfront? There are a few credits in here and that don't quite apply to this project around industrial access to the waterfront. We look at diverse programming and educational features. Next slide. We're looking at things like transportation access to the water, maritime or environmental employment opportunities, waterfront pathway and greenway connectivity, direct connections to the water for people and boats, and supporting diverse and sustainable maritime activity. Now, with those two industrial ones that I referenced, we don't expect that there's a site that's going to get every single point in the WEDG standard. There's a that would be a public park that also has a shipping port that's also, you know, a major resilience hub for a city. We don't expect that every project is going to pursue every credit, but there's a threshold of you need of the 250 points across the project that you can earn by adhering to the things in these credits. You need 130 to earn WEDG verification. Go to the next slide. Edge composition, category 3, is going to look at what are you doing on the water's edge itself. So if we think of the spectrum of water's edges that you can do it, at one end of the spectrum, you have steel and concrete in the water. And at the other end of the spectrum, you have wetlands and beaches and natural shorelines. WEDG tries to push everybody towards this more natural edge, recognizing that there are places that that's going to work and there are places that that's not going to work. And we're then looking at how can you make the most natural or nature-based shoreline that you can, given the context and the use for the site. It's also going to look at things like how are you changing the natural shoreline, or how are you changing the shoreline shape or slope to make them more natural, particularly on rivers. We've historically channelized a lot of our rivers. They're straight and fast moving. That's not the way they were 200 years ago. We're also going to look at, you know, when you have to have that concrete and steel in the water. A good example of on this project is around a bridge abutment that exists. How are you providing ecological enhancements to those so they aren't detractors from the natural ecosystems? Next slide. Natural resources and sustainability is going to look at how are you siting with ecological sensitivity? How are you creating or restoring habitats and ecosystem services? That's something that this project did an exceptional job with. How are you creating ecosystem connectivity, habitat complexity, and biodiversity? That's looking at things like, are you using native plantings, avoiding human disturbances to natural resources, redeveloping and cleaning up degraded sites? Next slide. And then more on the sustainability side, we're looking at fill and soil management. Are you using local fill, renewable or resilient energy sources, carbon reductions, environmentally responsible construction, reduced water use, and engaging a partner over the long term? And then the next slide, the innovation credits. These are essentially the bonus points in WEDG for projects that have gone really far above and beyond, or are doing something that is kind of unique to the site. And in the presentation, Ben and Greg will talk about some of the things that they did that earned these credits. Go to the next slide. And then just to talk a little bit about how WEDG evaluated this project. So WEDG reviews happen in with Waterfront Alliance coming in as the project manager. The design team, in this case, Calibre Engineering and Wenk Associates, submitted all of the project's documentation. So everything from the basis of design, the planting plan, construction documents, the maintenance plan for the site, City and County of Denver's emergency planning documentation. All of that comes to Waterfront Alliance. And then we pulled in a series of engineers, architects, environmental professionals, landscape architects, some of whom were local to Denver and understood the site. We asked them to do the scoring of this design against the WEDG standard. So you have not only Waterfront Alliance expertise coming to bear on this review process, but we're also bringing in independent experts who know the design process really well and can pour over what amounted to probably 7,000 or 8,000 pages of submission material for a typical project. That's who's doing the evaluation and making that final determination of, yes, this project is going to meet this incredibly rigorous WEDG standard. You can go to the next slide. So at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Ben Murphy and Greg Dorolek. Ben is an associate and civil project manager at Calibre Engineering, which was the prime on the project. And then Greg Dorolek is an associate at Wenk Associates. Wenk was the landscape architect on the project, and also the primary lead on submitting the materials for wedge review. Both were great partners through this process, and I'm excited to turn it over to Ben and Greg to talk you through the actual site itself.
Great. Thanks, Joseph. Sorry, I don't know. Joseph, are you running the PowerPoint or Ben, you running it?
A third
So,
person, David, is the Waterfront Alliance hostess. So
okay.
just tell
So
him next
David, I will
slide and
say advance. So, um, thank you all. And Joseph teed this up well. I mean, we are just absolutely thrilled to even be able to submit this project. As Joseph said, I think this is the first riverine project that has been certified. And when we, sort of learned of Wedge, Ben and I and others on the project knew this was a really good candidate to, because as we started to learn, the goals were so much aligned with what our, not just our design team. And one thing we'll talk about here is how aligned our developer was in doing what was right for the river. So I'm probably going to give a 10-minute overview of, a little bit of history of this project and history of the timeline of some things that were happening in Denver at the same time. And then I think Ben's going to knock it down here with a little more detailed analysis and things like that. So next slide here. Um, as Joseph said, Calibre was the lead on the river work, but it was a huge team to do this. And what's not even shown, just in terms of all the different engineers, geotechnical, others, ecologists that were on this, we have probably an equal team of architects, urban designers, and planners working on the 66-acre development that was next to this. That is one link us and Calibre have was we were both, Wenk was both the landscape architect for the river, but we were also urban designer and landscape architect for the development. And similarly, Ben's team with Calibre was doing both the river and sort of the engineering. So one thing we'll try to show too, and even though it doesn't go through all the submittal, is how in line sort of the new does this new portion of redevelopment in the city would meet the South Platte River edge. Next slide. So this is what we'll be talking about. Sort of the white area that you see on here depicts sort of the layout of the building grid and a potential development. And we're looking at a mile-long stretch of the South Platte River where this portion of our city is going to meet the river in a very meaningful way. And I think maybe next slide is a few slides here to maybe better represent this for those of you that may not know Denver well or never been here or just sort of seeing it for the first time. This image is flipped a little bit from what that plan view was showing. But what you're seeing in the background is our sort of, major urban core. This area is still very much part of downtown, very walkable to the urban core. But it is where our arena is today, and what is just north of that, but sort of planned south along the river, is Elitch Gardens, which is an amusement park, an urban amusement park that is there today and has been here about 25 years. That park has seen sort of it's highly desirable land. I think there are better places for a amusement park. And Ben will talk a lot. One of the reasons it hasn't been developed to date is one, it's brownfield environmental conditions, but much of it is in the floodplain. So here we are with this massive opportunity to, sort of not rethink Denver as a city, but really add to its vitality through density and other things, and really repair and restore the river that is adjacent to it. Next slide. So these are just sort of, almost similar shots, sort of 25-year vision of what the build out could be. I used to know all the square footage numbers, Ben, by hand. I don't know that I know those anymore, but I think one of the talking points of the River Mile plan that we really were kind of excited about and still are is that for those of you who don't know, Denver doesn't have a very big urban downtown population. Denver as a city, we have a lot of neighborhoods, but not a lot of people live downtown. And so there's not a ton of vitality as much as there could be in the evening hours and others. And so uh, I think what was really great is that's what really this development sought out. It will, still seek out to do is that this project alone would double the residential density in downtown. So next slide. So for us, that was really something we had to think about, not just as sort of river planners and designers, but urban designers and landscape architects and engineers. And just to paint a little more history to this is that prior to all of us beginning sort of working with the developer on this parcel, what was happening in Denver 2 years prior was what was called the Urban Waterways Restoration Plan. And that was a larger partnership between the Army Corps and the city of Denver and other stakeholders to secure federal funding to restore 7 miles of the Platte River. As they were doing and go for the grant, and Denver was awarded that grant probably sometime in 2021, 22, I would think, if I remember right. It was at that time it was the largest federal grant for a restoration we think that the feds have ever that anyone had ever received. So that study did not, however, take into context take into consideration the context. It was really about the channel. It was really about, and all for right reasons, was really about sort of restoration, improving water quality, improving habitat, improving biodiversity. You can go to the next slide. And I would say it was a little light on recreation, although that was also considered. And so what was happening, and Wenk Associates was fortunate enough to be on that project as well as the landscape architect, where recreation connectivity, those were more a narrative for that study. It was really based on gaining habitat units and looking again at biodiversity. So what was really interesting is we had that plan finishing up, and then we had started outreach and working with the developer on the River Mile urban plan. What was very interesting is they were saying different things. It was giving us two different priorities for our riverfront. One was very natural and with good intentions. The other, and those for who have never been to Denver, we don't have a single place in Denver where you can get a beer, a drink, eat a burger, or overlook the river. We're still a city that is growing out of sort of the river as the back door. We still have not adjusted yet to the river being our front door. And so we have a lot of city plans, a lot of outreach that is clamoring for really a different sort of riverfront for Denver, one that we can live on, one that we can be on, one that really, where again, sort of the city can meet the water's edge. So that's what I think was really fun about, as Joseph said, the connectivity or the access became really important in this. And so next slide. So one thing that we sort of utilize, and we've used these graphics now, having developed the plan, I think maybe take a step back. Why I mentioned the developer in this was because when we have, the restoration plan that's looking at habitat units and the development plan, we had a developer that we approached and said, hey, what does the river want to be? What does it all want to accomplish? And it really follows a lot of these wedge principles, right? And one of the more nervous times in my career, we were asking the developer to give land to make this right. So we and Calibre started to look at the river, the design, the ecology, everything we were doing without the property line in mind. We were designing what the river needed to be, and then we would draw the property line of where the development edge wanted to be. And it ended up, the developer gave to the city 2 to 3 acres of developable land on this riverfront, which, was millions and millions of dollars as it relates to sort of that. So one way we talk about this a lot is, this could be more urban, more natural, more connected. So this was really the more urban slide of getting to that sort of river's edge and looking at sort of opportunities of key plazas or key urban spaces touching the river. um, a lot of new opportunities for recreation and access to the river's edge. Next slide. At the same time, meeting these guidelines and also expanding upon them. I think the one thing the plan did rich, and you can see it on the bottom, is we were able to create a lot more biodiversity along this river's edge. And that's why we gain, for those of you, Denver right now, as Joseph said, a lot of urban rivers have been channelized, and it's more of a cross section like this. It's sort of a flat bottom V channel that really runs through Denver. And so with more land, we're able to lay back banks, able to do other things to create a more, again, a more biodiverse edge that can react to the different flood stages. And so again, we were actually we were making a far richer sort of riparian edge or wetland edge than what was even called for in the urban waterway study. And then what you see down there on the bottom left is that, a lot of times in sort of an urbanized stream like this, we needed sort of tow protection as well as sort of river access, hardened tow protections. And in this case, we were using stone in areas. But one of the challenges of a restoration project is that, especially in densities like this, they can get loved to death. And so that you have to, the way we rechanneled the river, it was actually going to provide more what we called sort of beach access or sort of access down at the water's edge. So we needed spaces like this for people to get down to those river edges, both in steps that could really work with the sort of vegetation concepts, but also, again, giving people access where they wanted to be so that we're not, creating cow paths through these very banks that we, aim to restore. Next slide. And then the more connected is really, the South Platte River. We do have a very nice continuous, bike and recreation trail on the South Platte today, but it works really well for commuting or getting to other areas of the metro region. I mean, you can get to Golden, you can get to, it connects to hundreds of miles of bike lanes, throughout sort of the metro area. What it doesn't do well, is live like this image on the right. It is not a place where you could have a kid in a stroller, or because it really is sort of a commuter fast speed bike lane. And so it would not handle the sort of, kind of density that this does. So again, one of the reasons to start working with the developer is like, let's create sort of this urban natural edge that is desired for the amount of people here. And so again, we created a much more, looking to Vancouver and other sort of major urban cities, of what are the right widths for people strolling, people, getting to the river's edge, bikes, and sort of the livability of that edge. So that this image that you see would be very, very unique to Denver. Next slide. And with that, I'll turn it over to Bill, but Ben. But just again, looking at a lot of the objectives here, I think Ben will really build on this. But what you'll see is these are no real different than sort of a lot of the wedge principles and objectives as well.
Thanks, Greg. Yeah, so on this slide, I think Greg hit on it and laid the groundwork for what we did. My goal is to kind of walk through more of the specificity of the different project elements here, and try to talk a little bit about how they fit into the wedge framework. But you could see, just based on these 4 objectives that we came up with through stakeholder engagement and stuff, are very, very similar in nature to the 6 categories that wedge has. laid out. So let's flip to the next slide. So as Greg mentioned, this is the overall project view of the project, and really we approached it as two projects that were twins, conjoined twins. Really, there was the River Restoration Project that we separated in our minds just from the nature of, as Greg was talking about, trying to design to what the river wanted to be without acknowledging what the development wanted to be. So we knew that the development wanted to be a 14 million square foot development, but we were, as Greg said, we were not so concerned about where that property line was. So we had a limitation on the bank left, the river left, or the north side of the screen here, because there's a historic trolley line that goes along that edge. So we knew we had a hard stop on that side. So really the only flexibility we had was on our own site to add in those elements, those project elements that the river really wanted it to be. Generally speaking, when you approach a river restoration project, as many people on the call probably know, is that flood conveyance is really like the primary top of the line objective, have to consider it, which was true for this project. It was definitely, as I showed before, one of those four objectives was flood conveyance. And from the city's perspective, that was the number one priority, was getting flood conveyance through here. But from our perspective, it was, we need to do what the river wants to do and make sure flood is still being passed through this site. So you can, next page here. This is actually the floodplain that Greg talked about earlier, that's passing through our site. It's kind of confusing if you're not familiar with Denver. The I-25 kind of looks more like a river because there's more of a meander there than the actual river itself. But the large magenta streak there is the floodway for the river. This is called the Zunai Street Spill, which is the effective FEMA floodplain. And so you can see about 1,700 CFS leaves the banks of the South Platte in the 100-year, passes across all of the Ball Arena site, which is the southern portion, and then eventually makes its way across the River Mile back into the South Platte. And kind of those like polka dot things in the bottom right there, that's about 8 feet deep on the south or on the River Mile site. So we had this huge flood issue across our site that we needed to deal with. And so if you page to the next one, we started approaching it from what the river wanted to be. We started to add in the meanders, started adding all these other ecological elements and monitoring where the floodplain was. So by the end of our project, when we're at 100% design here, this is what the floodplain will look like here in blue. The flood or the water is moving from left to right across the screen here. So upstream is on the left. So there's still a spill that happens upstream of our site, but it still makes it back to the river before it gets to our parcel. But in the end, when this project is done, we will convey the 100-year. And that primarily started because at the downstream end where those two rivers are conjoining at the confluence of those, there is a dam that I'm going to talk about here in a little bit that was created to create an irrigation intake. One of the very first things we did as we got on the project after the Army Corps engineers kind of did their study of this, we said we acknowledge that there's a dam here. We don't want it because the river doesn't want it. So that dam was actually creating a sedimentation issue throughout the entire reach upstream and actually raised the entire riverbed by 6 feet over the last 50 years with sediment that was settling in this reach. So our project gets rid of that dam and lowers the entire reach of the river by on average about 6 feet. So flip to that next page. Parts of what we wanted to do, one of the very first things we did is we wanted to reintroduce a meander into the river. On the top left there, you could see what the existing condition is on one of the worst portions of the river. And the bottom left is what we were aiming to do with our design. And that is probably the most confined portion of the site there. But you can see we're limiting the actual floodway of the river to a maximum of 100 feet and then using benching to convey that flood. But we're adding in as much meander as possible. And it's not just the meander aspect of it and the pattern of creating benches and so forth, but we're also using that meander to create the natural pools and riffles that should occur in a river. And the goal there is primarily aquatic habitat creation and aquatic temperatures, trying to bring those down so that things can actually survive in this river. In the summertime, the river temperatures here can reach about 80 degrees. So with these pools, we're trying to bring that temperature down to something that things can actually survive in. Our pool depths are on average about 5 feet, and at the most we get to about 10 feet deep below the base elevation. go 2 slides ahead because I forgot to reorder it when I sent it out. So this slide talks about that meander is shown on the screen there. The other thing that happened when we started to consider the meander on the project is there are 33 stormwater outfalls that are coming to the river within this 1.5 mile reach, a little bit less than 1.5 mile reach, 33 of them. Every single one of those is untreated and undetained, bringing directly urban runoff into the river reach. And in some cases, those large 3 bubbles that are on the screen there are draining huge portions of Denver's suburbs directly into the river. And there's base flow in those outfalls that are actually what we call urban drool. And when we went out there in the field to do our due diligence, there's actually like green sludge coming from those outfalls in some cases, and those are coming directly into the river and being conveyed downstream. So when we started to look at the meander pattern here, we made slight adjustments to align our meander to where these different outfalls, the largest 3 outfalls of the river reach, were placed. And if you go back up 1 slide, so that we did that intentionally so that we could do something about those. If you want to go page back 1 slide. So we could do something about those outfalls. On the top of the screen there is what normally happens. We've lowered the river 6 feet. We have our regional trail up on the far right, and we would kind of taper down on those outside bends or inside bends. Instead, at those specific outfall locations, we dropped down much steeper from the regional trail and enabled us to have more of a width within the river corridor to add in an emergent wetland with willow shrublands. When we proposed that, which we were not required to do, and Joseph talked about kind of going above and beyond the criteria manuals or whatever. We were not required to touch those outfalls. They weren't even on our side of the river. It was that's not our responsibility. That's a city responsibility kind of a mentality, but we approached it as what does the river want us to do? We suggested this and suggested adding in these wetlands, and the immediate response we got was we're creating a large maintenance burden for the city to have to come in and maintain these wetlands because they're bringing in all the trash from the communities upstream. Our response to that was, well, you can either deal with it at one point source, or you can deal with it for the next 7 miles of river in your city. So that was a very quick conversation. Ended up being of like, we understand that this is creating a temporary maintenance burden, but at the same time, it's probably actually going to reduce it because it's the same amount of trash, but now it's located in one location instead of spread out like a trash truck down the highway. So page through a couple slides to get to the, yep. So we talked earlier about the dam at Confluence Park. The Confluence Park here on the left is as it exists. I mentioned that dam that was installed for the irrigation ditch. Confluence of Cherry Creek and the South Platte here was actually the origin of City and County of Denver. This was where it was founded. And so this is a very important cultural moment. There's a lot of summer festivals that happen here. There's a lot of vibrancy to this, despite the fact that there's constantly E. coli being found in the river there. But it also means that because they added that dam in, they also added in this whitewater structure. And so that Army Corps project that Greg mentioned earlier contemplated leaving this dam here and leaving the whitewater park. When we came to the project, we realized that no matter what they did with this dam, even if they opened up the gate to flush the sediment, it would still cause sedimentation issues. So all of that work that we would do upstream would be for naught eventually. We also realized that this was creating a huge elevation challenge for us because we needed to move sediment in the stream upstream of it. And this was creating an issue where we were losing about 6 feet of head that we could use for the rest of the reach to make it what the river wants to be. So not quite day one, but very close to day one, we said, let's get rid of this thing and let's see what we can do upstream of it, what the river wants it to be. So we proposed getting rid of this, and then we immediately turned and hired 3-time world champion kayaker Scott Shipley to come in and talk to the whitewater groups within Denver who would potentially get upset about this. And really what we found through that specific, like hyper specific stakeholder engagement was that kayakers want the river to be what the river wants to be, not the kayakers want whitewater. There's much more. They want the river to be healthy because that's what they care about. They care about rivers. They don't necessarily care about the whitewater component of it. But to appease them, if you go to the next slide, we did add in a standing wave within the river, strategically placing it in front of a portion of the development. This is where Greg talked about how our development team was working together with our river teams to make it so that the two teams were talking the same language and both were benefiting off of each other. We've strategically placed the standing wave feature across from the Central River Plaza, where the kind of the major hub of energy and events would take place on the development, right across from it. So you could have events, then people could be watching it, where people are surfing and having enjoyment down at the river here, as well as down at Confluence that we talked about a little bit earlier here. So next page. Greg also talked about access points. One thing that we realized as we were doing this, there was really only one location on the river where there was a true meander that the river really wanted it to be, and what we called the Big Bend. It was the largest change in direction in the river through the city of Denver's limitations. We called it the Big Bend because of that. It had the most possibility to get a really nice long arc in the meander. So as a design team, we realized, well, if this is the only part where we can potentially make it natural, let's really lean into that. And so we pushed that river edge as far as we possibly could towards the river left side there, as close as we could get to the trail, meaning that we had a huge grade differential, about 20 to 25 feet between the trail and the bottom of the pool here. And so we could either make up all that with, San Antonio Riverwalk style walls across the whole bank there, or we could create a moment here that doesn't exist anywhere in Denver, where you can look to your left and look all the way down the river through downtown Denver, or look to your right and look down into the suburbs down the river and look straight ahead and see this huge skyline. So you can feel like you're both in the river and in the city at the same time. And so that was a very cool moment where we worked with stakeholder engagement to realize that although this is a hard piece, a hardscape on the river corridor, it's also a moment that doesn't exist anywhere else in the river. So it's providing that controlled access point that Greg was talking about down into the river, so we're not trampling over all the other wetlands that we have installed. Next slide. I threw this one in here just to talk briefly about some of the other notable features. I talked a little bit about the outfalls. We strategically tried to reduce the outfalls as much as we could. We got down to about 20. We were at 33. We would have loved to get down to 10 or less, but it was just physically not possible. We are also adding about 3 miles worth of wider recreational trails, both on both sides of the river. So we were not just doing our side of the river. We were reaching across the other side of the river and doing that portion as well. We added in a few walls within the confines of where highways and so forth were going, and we tried to limit those to as much as we possibly could to create less of a canyon approach to this portion. And then we also added one last drop to at the very top end of our stream, which really acts as a starting point for the next reach to happen. So we're installing that drop structure, and we've designed it in such a way that whomever comes along and does the next portion, the next mile and a half of river upstream of us, could actually cut off that drop structure and use that 3-foot grade to push through their stream to be able to play with more of those benching that we have in our site. Next page. Go one more. So we did want to talk about just specifically how our experience was with Wedge. I think there's most of us on the call are very familiar with LEED. A lot of times you get a client or an owner or an agency that comes to you and says, look, this project will be LEED silver, LEED gold, LEED platinum, whatever it is. And then you start chasing points, saying, all right, well, we're going to throw in a bike garage here because then we can get 3 points out of it. What happened on this project is we were at 100% design before we even found out about Wedge. And so we looked at what our project goals, and like I mentioned before, and what their project goals were. If you click to the next slide, they were actually the same. They were exactly the same. That we both shared this riverfront water first goal and objective. What does the river want? What does the water want? And then let the design kind of blend into that. And what we really found that was interesting was after we discovered LEED is that they were much more eloquent about speaking about waterfront edges than we ever were. And so it was very cool to see all of the language that was built into the criteria manual and take that language and really enable us to talk to city officials and other clients and other projects across the country about doing very similar approaches without having to, convince them, well, do the right thing. It's more of a, look, there's already a whole series of criteria here that is completely directed towards what the river wants most and why it matters to the development and to the river itself, or waterfront. So that is kind of the long short of it. I tried to talk fast there so we could get to some questions, but yeah.
And just to clarify that last point, it was Wedge that did that, not LEED.
Yeah, sorry,
They
Wedge.
gave you the language.
Yeah, Wedge did. My bad.
So we've got a couple questions from the the audience, and I'm happy to have more if folks want to use that Q&A portion. David, if you could switch to slide 23, there's a question that came up there. So based on this is from Michelle Edwards, based on the slide that included the cross section of the waterfront, for those transition areas that are going to allow access further down to the waterfront, have you had any challenges in providing ADA accessibility to that part of the waterfront?
Joseph, I'm not sure
So-
which is 23.
Go
I
to
don't
the
see it on
wetland-
there.
it's the one that
one.
says
The
more
wetland cross
natural.
section. Yeah.
I can probably take this, Ben. I think some of the cross sections that you see are sort of a moment right at, again, this is a cross section of a particular moment, and we have nearly a mile and a half of riverfront here. So we do have, I don't know that we the answer is no. I mean, I think I don't remember in our plan, Ben, but I think at least we probably have a method for ADA access every quarter mile on
Yeah,
this
can
plan. I
you
think we
go
have
to
4 or
the-
5 of.
Can you go like 3 slides before this
Yeah,
to the overall view?
we can get down at least 4 to 5 times if I remember correctly.
One after this.
Maybe even more if you include Confluence Park. So it is a challenge though,
So-
Michelle. It is a challenge to do that.
We had them here, so I don't
yeah.
know. Hopefully this is working, but there's accessible access here and accessible access here down to the river's edge, as well as a portion here and then another portion back here. So we kind of like what Greg was saying is it's a little bit less than a half a mile, quarter mile, somewhere in there. So you're
There's 2
coming
more
down.
downstream of that, Ben. There's one at
Yeah.
Centennial Gardens, and then you go to Confluence, and so
Yeah, you
there's
got
even 2 more. Yeah.
All this is accessible down
Yep.
here along the main portion of the river. We've made sure that we had accessible moments at these kind of key moments. So the water edge, the accessible moment is at the big bend there. And then further upriver, there's it's just too steep there. So there's not even people access, kind of from here this way. It's just too steep for everybody. So you're up at the top of the bank looking down at the river.
There's another question in the chat around the extent to which you designed to the current FEMA floodplain, and how you've considered future conditions that might have higher peak flows.
Yeah. So from our perspective, the one thing that's beneficial in the city of Denver is that it's super flashy, and those flashy moments take so long to get back to the river that those peaks are kind of reduced, more or less. So there's also a dam that protects the entire reach of Denver upstream. So what they have found through studies within the city of Denver through the Mile High Flood District is that those projected peaks in Denver will be higher, but not discernibly by comparison to, like, say, along the Ohio River or something, where you have a much, much wider basin. There's a smaller basin that's coming to the river here. But there is what is that, a 2-foot freeboard above our banks for the 100-year that's built into this. So we're not able to contain the 500-year because it's too large. There's too many spills that are even upstream of us. We couldn't control that anyway. But our reach itself has a 2-foot freeboard from base flow of the 100-year up to the edge of what we were designing here.
And that aligns with the requirements in WEDG that are one of the criteria in the flood reduction credit is base flood elevation plus 2 feet for rivers. And it varies based on, are you riverine, are you coastal, are you like a stream, or are you Great Lake? All right, the only other question that came in is, when will this presentation be posted? This will be on the Waterfront Alliance website later today. David, if you could switch to the very last slide. I'll also give a plug for our WEDG Professionals course that's coming up. This is the first time that we have done a Rivers edition of the course. It's occurring next Wednesday and Thursday, November 12th and 13th. It's 1 to 5 o'clock Central Time, but 12 to 4 Mountain Time. Does offer AIA and ASLA CEUs. The WEDG Professionals course goes through the WEDG standards in depth, and then you hear case studies like this, including this one. Ben and Greg will be sharing this project again. Folks are welcome to join that. If there are folks working in the Mississippi River Basin, those discount codes in the upper right are for you if you're in a state that touches the Mississippi River Basin. Course is about 8 hours in total across the 2 days, and you're joining about 1,400 people who have become WEDG professionals. Those that take this course join that network. So if there are no other questions, we can go ahead and conclude. I want to thank Ben and Greg for sharing this project today. We're very, very excited to have this first project west of the Mississippi River, the first truly riverine projects. There are other projects on river, but they've been coastal historically through WEDG. So having one that deals with these really unique constraints of building in a riverine system and the unique flood dynamics there was a great test of both the WEDG standard and its effectiveness, but also just demonstrates the value that thinking around resilience, ecology, and access can bring to cities like Denver. So Ben and Greg, thank you very much. And to the audience, thanks for joining today.